Hi, I'm Olivia Zenteno, and this week in our Quarantine Quiet Times, we're talking about connection with Jesus. And today I wanted to talk about the power of a godly touch. And as I was thinking about this whole idea of connection with Jesus, there's one story in the Bible that really came to mind. And, a while ago I was reading this book called Just Like Jesus by Max Lucado, and he took a story that was seemingly short and not very descriptive, and took it and really made it come alive. And it's the story of Jesus healing the leper. Now, with Jesus healing the leper, I'm going to read from Matthew 8, but it's only 5 verses long. And it's interesting because it's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And you think, wow, it seems like maybe an insignificant story because it's so short, but really, after you read it, you realize it's really powerful. And so let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll dive right in. So Matthew 8, verse 1 through 4. It says, "When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said, 'be clean.' Immediately he was cleansed of leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, 'See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the gift of Moses as a testimony to them.'" And I think I read this, and again, it's a powerful story. There's nowhere else before this. So there's other places in the Bible, but this is the first time that Jesus has healed a leper. It's interesting, as I was reading the Max Lucado book, he basically takes this story and he tells us this man, the leper, his entire life story, and he really makes it come alive. As I did a little research about lepers during Jesus' time before I filmed this, and basically what it said was that lepers needed to stay 6 feet away from people at all times, and if they came into contact with people, they had a bell around their neck, kind of alerting people of their presence. But if it was a windy day at all, they had to stay 150 feet away from the nearest person, which basically meant if it was a windy day, they couldn't go into town. So if there was like a windy season, then they wouldn't be anywhere near another person for a very long time unless it was in the leper colony. And so just to give you a little bit of a setting before we jump into the story. But so Max Lucado basically takes this verse and brings this whole story to life, right? And so that's what I'm going to tell you. And so basically how the story goes is there's this man, and he's a farmer. He owns a lot of farmland, and he's working harvest season, and he has his farm tool, and he starts to notice some numbness in his fingers. And he says by the end of harvest season, his entire hand is numb. And even though he's holding his tool, he can't feel it in his hand. And he thinks his wife is starting to speculate there's something wrong, but she hasn't said anything to him. And then one day, he's washing his hands in the barrel, and the entire barrel fills with the color red. And he looks at his hand and he realizes it's bleeding. And he realizes I have leprosy. There's something wrong. I can't, it's progressing. It's getting worse. And his wife comes up behind him and basically says, "You want me to come with you to the high priest?" Because that's what they had to do. They had to report to the high priest. And he says, "No, I'll go alone." And he, gently strokes her shoulder, and their 3-year-old daughter comes and he strokes her cheek, understanding this is the last time I'm probably ever going to see them, and probably the last time I'm ever going to touch somebody. Because when you had leprosy, not only do you walk away from all the people you love, you walk away from your home, you walk away from your business, you lose everything to stay away from the rest of the people. And so he does that, he's declared unclean by the high priest, and he lives this life completely alone. And it kind of goes through different circumstances where he's walking in crowds and how he just would long to bump into somebody. He would long for someone to tap him on the shoulder. He would long to interact with anybody, to shake someone's hand, but he had not touched anybody in 5 years since that interaction with his wife and child when he left them. And it's really incredible. You think this person, this man, he was completely, even though he was completely diseased on the outside, on the inside, he was a soul. He was a person. He was hurting. And it's incredible hearing this story. It brings it to life. And the story continues, and it says, one day he decided to to go to his village where his farm was, because he just wanted to look upon his land and maybe see his wife. And as he goes, he sees his children playing in the field. And as they're playing, he just kind of is just so taken with their innocence and their joy. He kind of just steps forward get a little closer. And as he steps forward, the children see him and they just flee in sheer terror and fear. But one child stays and just kind of looks at him questioning. And he says, I knew in my heart that was my daughter. And that moment is what emboldened him to take the next steps, to take the steps towards being with Jesus. Not being with Jesus, sorry, but the next steps to calling out to Jesus. Because again, like I mentioned before, there had been no record of Jesus healing a leper. In the Jewish culture, a leper, other than a dead body, was the most unclean thing that if you were Jewish, you were forbidden to touch. It wasn't just like, it was a bad idea to touch them. It was against the law. And so for him to do what he did in this scripture, it must have taken a lot for him to do that, especially after 5 years of isolation and rejection. And as the story continues, it says that as he was seeing Jesus, he calls out to him, and as he was kind of expecting to see fear or irritation or frustration, but what he saw was love in Jesus's eyes, and how everybody for the last 5 years had stepped away from him, but Jesus stepped towards him. How for the last 5 years, no one would touch him or even look at him, but Jesus looked into his soul and not only was willing to cleanse him and heal him, but reached out and touched him. And what an impact that made on his heart. And just the story continues that he's, restored back to his family, and it's incredible. But it really got me thinking in my own life, wow, no wonder this story is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because what Jesus did was so counterculture. Not just counterculture, it was unlawful what Jesus did, to touch a leper, that people were astounded. Reading this in that time, in that culture, they would have been moved to see Jesus' love and compassion for this man. It would have humbled them. So no wonder this powerful 5-verse story is in 3 books of the Bible. And I got to thinking about myself. I got to thinking about how does this story impact me? And I think the first thing that came to my mind was everybody has a story. Everybody. You think about this man, obviously we don't know too much of his story from the Bible, but as soon as Max Lucado laid out that story of his life, immediately it's easy to connect with those emotions. It's easy to understand his pain. He's no longer just this unclean man in the crowd. He's a man with a lost life, a lost family, and I thought about in my daily life, I think this idea of a godly touch. I think there's big times we think about godly touches, whether it's these monumental things that can happen in our lives or other people's lives, whether it's memorial services or loss of loved ones. We think about reaching out a hand, crying with them, bringing them a meal, new jobs. I think about times where I've walked into a new job and it's scary and someone shakes your hand and smiles and invites you to lunch. Like, that's a godly touch. That's totally from God. Or even, I was a new kid a lot at school, the new kid at school, and when someone was just warm and friendly and asked you to come play with them, that was a godly touch, right? But there are so many ways in daily life, and I think especially even in this quarantine and during coronavirus, where we can be the touch of God to people. I was thinking about myself, and it's with the masks, we have to wear our masks everywhere, and we can't really smile at people. And I was in Costco, and Costco is packed this day. And I had my shopping cart with my groceries, and I pull out of an aisle and I get in line. And the guy behind me goes, "Lady, the line is back there." He could not have been more rude. And I kind of looked at him and I smiled and said, "Okay, it's going to be okay. I'll go to the back of the line." And I was trying to be friendly, and he couldn't see that I was smiling. He just kind of was so irritated that I would have cut him in line, even though I had no idea I was cutting line. And I just thought to myself, one, I'm really sad that I can't smile. There's not that human connection with people. But I think the other thing was, who knows what this man's experiencing? Who knows how Corona is impacting him, how the quarantine's impacting him? I don't know if he lost a loved one, if maybe someone close to him contracted the virus and so he hasn't been able to see them for a long time. Or maybe he's just lonely and he misses human connection. And I thought about how many people in my life could that be true for? And I think the thing that I want you to walk away from this quiet time with is the power of a godly touch, what that can do for not just you, but also for other people, whether it's strangers in the grocery store or even just people that God prompts your heart with, whether it's friends, coworkers, your fellow, brothers and sisters at church. I think sometimes we can be thwarted by the idea of, oh, that'll be messy, that'll just take too much time, or we can get in routine of our lives. Like we can get in the routine of kind of, okay, working from home, or our quarantine lives are kind of humming. We have our family time, and it's hard to sometimes think beyond ourselves. But I think the thing I want to encourage you is when God prompts our hearts to engage in a messy situation, I'm calling it messy, or engage in a difficult situation, or engage in a time-consuming situation, to be like Jesus and step into the situation rather than stepping back, being willing to heal with a touch rather than just heal with a word. So I hope this helped your quiet time today. This is something that really impacted me and I wanted to share with you. And also, if you wouldn't mind, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay in tune and in touch with our daily quarantine quiet times and get a lot more of our awesome content. Have a great day.